Today I wanted to make a video about passive therapy modalities from all different kinds, and talk about why we need to always consider / prioritize using passive modalities with active input, always following them up with active input. So before I get into this too much, I just want to use a simple phrase that I picked up from the functional range conditioning community. Dr. Andrea Spina, Dewey Nelson, when I took a functional range conditioning seminar a few years back, I'll never forget this statement, but they said something that resonated with me heavily, and that was a passive input gives you a passive result, and an active input will give you an active result, or at least be able to apply it actively to things that you need to do. So without overthinking it too much, basically it comes down to something as simple as, if I want my tissue to work better actively, so if I want my squat to work better and I want my knees to be able to travel over my toes better when I squat, or I want my ankles to be able to dorsiflex better when I squat, or I want my overhead flexion to be better when I do overhead press or snatches or something like that, I need to make sure that I reinforce whatever I do passively to open that tissue up with something active, so I can train my nervous system to keep it. So there's a bunch of different stuff out there that we use. As a manual therapist, I use anything that I think will work. Nowadays, my hands are by far my best weapon. I don't use much of this stuff anymore like I used to. However, there's a time and place for everything. So we'll just use something like Graston, for example. This is more of a clinical application. This is something that a lot of people get done when they go to physical therapist offices. Maybe you have a sports therapist, massage therapist you go to who does like cupping and scraping on you. So when you do something like this, a lot of the times you're going to get this tissue opened up. So like, say, we'll just use a really super basic example. Like, I've got really locked up wrists because I do a lot of manual therapy. I also abuse myself with training, and I'm not the best with keeping track of my own body. I'm guilty of that, I'll admit it. But I always make sure that if I do something to open up a range of motion, I always follow it up with something active. So if I was to, like, my goal is I need more wrist extension. I don't have very much of it. I need to have about 90 degrees of pure wrist extension that I can access whenever I want. Now, I can take one of these Graston tools and I can go over my forearms and I can scrape everything to hell, and I can open up all this cool stuff, and I can give my body this temporary window of, man, that feels good. And just right off the bat, I don't know, you might see a small little improvement from that. Probably not, because I did it for like 5 seconds. But if someone works on you for 30 minutes doing something like this, and then they look you in the eyes and say, all right, you're good to go, and they don't give you any type of training or anything to follow up the therapeutic input, you're missing a huge piece to the puzzle. Your central nervous system needs to be taught that what just happened and what just opened is actually usable. Usable range of motion is super fucking important. A lot of people get caught up in how far they can push themselves or pull themselves passively, and they don't think about how far can I actually contract my own tissue to get into a range of motion. And we need to think about those things, because the whole point of training is to maximize what we can do actively to get whatever result we want. Like, if we can't squat at all with our own body weight clean, and anyway, and I know people who really are terrible squatters, but you load them up with 150, 190, 200 plus pounds of weight, and all of a sudden their squats look phenomenal. And to me, my humble opinion, that's playing with fire, because you're forcing your system into a position it's not willing to go to. Now, without getting into too much stuff, yes, there are some athletes who develop a certain level of elastic response with their tissue. Sprinters are a good example in their calf muscles. They have a lot of elastic energy that can build up, a lot of potential kinetic energy that gets built up in their tissue, and it allows a certain pop and a certain explosive input for their training. That's not exactly what I'm talking about right now. I'm talking about something as simple as, you know, your hips are sticky when you squat, and some trainer at some point told you, hey, let's foam roll and smash your quads and smash your hamstrings and smash your IT bands and your glutes, and then go squat, and it'll feel so much better. Now, the problem with that is that when you do these modalities, like things like these AccuBalls, which I love, and I can beat the hell out of my tissue, and I can teach my clients to use things like this to beat the hell out of their tissue. And temporarily, what it's going to do is it's going to dampen the way the central nervous system perceives an area. So with that dampened tone, the body gives itself a temporary window of access to range of motion, which for a lot of people makes them feel really good, and then sometimes they keep repeating that process. I've seen people at places like Lifetime Fitness and 24 Hour, for example, and I used to be guilty of this myself long before I learned this stuff. I would see people take these tools and smash the hell out of their bodies and then immediately get underneath the squat bar and try to PR because it feels better. They feel looser. Well, what you've done is you've basically taken a system, or we'll use like an electrical kind of analysis, but say you're getting 100% electrical current to a given, I don't know, appliance, whatever, 100% electrical current to whatever you're trying to activate. And then you take something like this and you smash it to pieces, and now instead of having all this crazy current, you take away, I don't know, I know that's my middle finger and I'm going to use this because it makes me laugh. Now we take away, say, I don't know, 70% of the tone, 60% of the tone, maybe just half the tone, whatever you want to call it. So now it feels like you have all of this open room to move. The reality is you've taken away half the tissue that helps you work. You've done this temporarily, but by dampening how the other tissue perceives what you're doing, you've now overloaded the stuff that's still working. And now it's taking substantially more load. So we want all the fibers to work. We want as much of our meat stuff to work as possible when we're training so we can get the most input and the most adaptation out of it. So if you're going to smash something and give yourself that temporary feel good, make sure you warm up afterwards. Integrate that new range of motion back into a pattern. In functional range conditioning, we use things like pails and rails to open up workspace, and then we use something called controlled articular rotations, or CARs, to upload that new workspace into the central nervous system. We use things like passive range holds and eccentric neural grooving to continue to upload at a higher level and really cause big stimulus to cause range of motions to keep. Now, this is just the system I use. There's tons of different ways of doing this, but I just want you guys to know that if you're going to, say you've got a cupping set at home and you're going to cup yourself all over the place just so you feel good. Once that goes away, if you haven't trained your system to keep it, or you haven't trained your body to understand that, hey, we now have new usable range of motion, let's try to use it and let's try to keep it, you're missing a big piece to the puzzle. So I just want you guys to remember that if you do something passively, most likely you're only going to get a passive input out of it for the most part. So be sure to follow it up with something active. If you're going to beat your quad tissue to open up so you can get a deeper squat or something like that, do something to encourage that tissue to be active at the length you want it to fire. So that could be something like you foam roll your quads and then you do a couch stretch and you kick down into the prop that you're propped up with, and then you try to hamstring curl back. Activate both sides. Nervous system likes that shit. It learns how to keep it. And then after you do a few rounds of that, maybe you just go through some general range of motion, try to take bigger range of motion, capture it further, then work in your global movement pattern like a squat or a lunge or whatever you want it to translate to. This stuff is just, it doesn't need to be complicated. I just want you to make sure you're not missing a valuable component to your self-care so that way you can get the best results. So if you've worked with me before in the past, you know that I have a process that I use. My hands are the passive input. We follow it up with CARs. We then do pails and rails. We follow it up with cars. We do eccentric range holds and passive range, or eccentric neural grooving and passive range holds. We follow it up with cars. We're constantly teaching the central nervous system to capture new range of motion as we open it, because these things are just tricks to the central nervous system. They give us temporary windows, and if we don't train the temporary windows to stick, we lose them. So that's basically all I really wanted to bring up today. I want you guys to just remember this stuff going forward as you care for yourselves. If you're a manual therapist watching this, if you're not a trainer, or you don't have the credential, or you don't have the experience to know how to integrate this stuff into your clients, refer them to somebody who might. If you're going to beat up somebody in a massage who's sport-minded and exercise-minded, maybe see if you can partner with somebody who's maybe on the strength conditioning side, who can give you some advice or help give them, your client, some advice how to better integrate this stuff. I'm partial to the functional range system. So I'm an FR practitioner now, and as an FR practitioner, I also use FRC. I've been through the whole system, so I use the whole system. But if I was only a manual therapist and I only used FR, or I only used my hands, whatever it was, I would look for somebody who might be like a physical therapist, strength conditioning coach hybrid, maybe just a good movement coach in the area, and I would refer back and forth, and I would make sure the person sees me for therapy and then goes straight to that person afterward to get the follow-up input for their active input, for their mobility, for the tissue specific, for the joint specific, so that way they can get the absolute best treatment possible and the best results possible. So I hope this makes sense. If you're a therapist and you have questions with this stuff, please don't hesitate to reach out. If you're in the FRC crowd and you have questions with this, I'm always happy to help my peers when it comes to this stuff. So thank you for watching, guys. If you have any questions whatsoever, drop them in the comments, send me a direct message, email me, whatever you want to do to reach out to me. I'm here to help. I'm here to offer guidance, and that's what I'm here to do. So thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see y'all on the next one.